One of my biggest gripes I have with the red pill and communities like it is the hyper deterministic lens through which they see a lot of things. It doesn't apply to everything, and there's some stuff that they get right, and where they do, I'll say that they're right. But one of the things that I cannot agree with is the super deterministic lens through which they paint a lot of stuff. For example, men are hardwired to just fuck around and not settle and can't settle with one person. Men aren't designed to be monogamous, and then that women are hardwired to exploit you for resources, and all of this goes back and it's justified by a whole bunch of evo psych bullshit. But the truth is a little bit more complicated than that. There is no kind of concrete standard narrative. Men do this and they are hardwired to do it. Women do this and they are hardwired to do it. There is just men do this, but they also do this, and women do this and they also do this. And I wanted to kind of justify that with the article that I have found for this video today that really got me thinking about whether or not this kind of dismantles a certain amount of the red pill narrative, because a lot of the red pill narrative is based on evolutionary psychology. But the more we look into evolutionary psychology and the less we try to narrativize it and the less we try to apply the way that we live now and just kind of run it back a few thousand or a few 10,000 years, the clearer things are starting to look. And thankfully it is not as bleak of a picture as we have thought all of this time. So in terms of the way that humans work sexually, we now are starting to understand that it is not just men are A and women are B, that there is a certain level of sexual omnivorousness that we are starting to get to grips with. And what do I mean by sexual omnivorousness? If I can spit the word out, well, let's have a little read of this article and we'll get into exactly what that means. But if you want a quick understanding as we're just jumping into it, essentially the idea that humans are sexual omnivores is basically the idea that we are a lot more sexually flexible than you might think. We are not hardwired for monogamy. We are not hardwired for whatever the opposite of monogamy is. What's the scientific term for fuck around and find out? I don't know. Let's read the article. So the article says that we're not quite a classically monogamous species, but neither are we a winner-take-all polygamous species either. Rather, we're a little bit from column A, a little bit from column B, a little bit of column C and D sprinkled in there for good measure, and a little bit of effect as well. He goes on to say that when thinking about sexual behavior, it may help to stop and remind ourselves that evolution did not design organisms to be static things or genetically determined automatons. We are not strictly one thing or another. We have been designed, and when I say designed, I mean in the broad sense, not in the religious sense. We have been designed to adapt. We are not static beings. We are not hardwired for a whole lot of stuff. He says one of the potential pitfalls when describing a species' behavior, particularly for a general audience, is the temptation to use single word descriptions. For example, polygamous, monogamous, polygynandrous. Fuck me, science is stupid. Certainly behavioural patterns exist, and these are very reasonable assessments of these species mating patterns, but one word cannot be all encompassing, because although we like to think categorically, behaviours are complex, variable and dynamic. Rigid definitions usually mean that some complexity has to be shaved off in order to fit a discrete category more cleanly. The problem isn't that these labels don't have any merit at all, because they obviously do when you look at labels such as humans are monogamous or humans are polygamous or polyandrous or whatever the fuck. It's that they have a tendency to overshadow the actual complexity of how we are as human beings. You see this also in the way that generally it's accepted in kind of pop evo psych that humans are naturally combative and competitive, and kind of warfare loving people. But the truth is that we are also very much wired for collaboration and cooperation, because if we weren't, there really wouldn't be the society that we have now. We went from having tribes of like 150 people to broadly accepting that we exist in tribes of millions of people, whether that be according to our country or according to our sports team or according to whatever idea of race that you have. Researchers have started to suggest that human mating patterns don't fall into a single category, and that the best fit for our species is a combination of monogamy and polygyny. That is to say that some aspects of our evolved biology and behavior are more consistent with monogamous species, for example the neurobiology of romantic love and pair bonding, while other traits hint at polygyny. Example, slight sexual dimorphism, the fact that many cultures allow men to have more than one wife. The article goes a lot deeper into the evolutionary evidence that humans are pretty sexually flexible, and there is evidence that we can really look at with our own eyes as well, if that's the kind of evidence that you prefer. We can look at the way that we organize ourselves in our romantic and sexual relationships. We know that we have a general tendency towards monogamy, but that isn't necessarily the same across all cultures. There are cultures and religions which lean more towards polygamy or polyamorous relationships. This is something that we are seeing a drastic rise in across the Western world. You're seeing a lot more polyamorous, polygamous relationships that are more open, relationships that have a lot more sexual flexibility. To me, this is really the best news that we could really have, because it means that we are flexible in our kind of sexual nature in a way that we haven't really had described to us pretty much forever. It means that relationships and sex do not have to fit into these very neat, discrete categories, that there is a lot of variation and a lot of complexity therein. If you would like to read a really good book on this, I'm reading one at the moment called Sex at Dawn. I'll have it pop up on the screen now. It is really interesting, and it covers a lot of the ideas that I've kind of covered in this video, but obviously to a lot more of an academic degree, because I'm not an evolutionary psychologist. I have a psychology degree, and that's helpful, but I'm not an evolutionary psychologist. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not a historian. But one of the main reasons why I support this narrative over the one that says that we are simply hardwired to like one thing and not another, and that we are hardwired to do one thing but not another, is because it doesn't, in my mind, line up with how adaptable humans are, and it doesn't, in my mind, line up with the massive variation that we have across societies and across cultures. It's not a narrative that I can use to very neatly fix the problems of the world by just kind of describing that, well, this is just the way that things are. And I find that there is a lot of very lazy narrativization that happens with evo-psych arguments. Inevitably, there's going to be people that disagree with me on this, but all you really have to do, if you don't believe me, you can look at statistics, actual statistics, not anecdotes, statistics on things like infidelity or the rise of polyamorous relationships or polygamous relationships, open relationships. You can really start to get an idea that maybe the standard narrative that we have of the way that we are romantically, relationshipally is not a word, but I've used it, sexually, it doesn't fit into this easy box. And if somebody ever wants to give you just an easy narrative, something that explains everything, they're probably trying to sell you some kind of bridge. We shouldn't just accept a narrative just because it is easy. As somebody who very much values freedom, I don't find myself often agreeing with deterministic views of the world. This is the way that things are because we are absolutely biologically kind of bound to that. I personally don't like the idea that I am hardwired to pair bond with someone but inevitably cheat on them. I think that's a pretty shitty view to have of myself and of men in general. I think that there's a high level of sexual flexibility that we do not talk about nearly enough. You can have your ideas about monogamy, or you can have your ideas about kind of stricter polygamy. I don't care. The point is that there isn't one answer. This is a complex thing, and anyone that tries to give you a deterministic, this is the way that things are because this is the way that we are wired to be. When it comes to our psychology, a lot of it is just bullshit narrativization to push an agenda, which is in its own way a shame, because I quite like the idea of men, for example, being primal and going back to their true nature, which I spoke about in the video that is popping up on the screen right now. So if you want to go and watch that, where I talk about why men find the idea of being primal and getting back to nature and getting back to kind of a more tribal time, then you can watch that video. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching this video all the way through. Like, subscribe, comment, all that jazz, and I'll see you in the next video very soon.